Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle, from tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/077, and you can email the show, pedalshift@pedalshift.net. Check the show out also on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Hello again, it's Tim Mooney, and back with you with episode 77 of the Pedalshift Project. And on this very special episode, it's going to be a chat with Jeremy Mendelson about touring differently as a vegan, on a Brompton, and much, much more. Jeremy is a really, really interesting guy, and I've been kind of in touch with him for a little while now, and I was so happy to bring this interview to you. We had a really great chat, and it's basically going to take up most of the show here because there's just a ton of stuff to talk about. Let me just kind of dive right into it, and I'll catch you on the back end of the interview, and we'll talk about other stuff as well for the rest of the show. But Jeremy Mendelson is a transit planner, geographer, traveler, bus driver, advocate, and co-founder of Transit Matters in Boston. He's currently working in Colorado for the winter season, and as we'll talk about in the interview, there's more of a means to an ends about that for his bike travel-oriented life setup. Living a more nomadic life that serves his bike touring is just the tip of the iceberg for how Jeremy tours differently, though. He's a longtime vegan, which we chat about, and a fan of touring on the little clown bike itself, the Brompton. It's such a great discussion. Let's just dive right into it. Hey, Jeremy, welcome to Pedalshift.
Hey, Tim, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I am thrilled to have you on the show because I feel like that I could split this up into multiple podcasts, but we're going to dive in and do all of this really good stuff that you've got to bring to the table in one. So I hope everybody's ready for this. We've got multiple cool topics to cover. Let's just go into your lifestyle. You describe yourself as being a semi-nomad. What was your journey to end up to where you're at with your lifestyle?
I guess I did the pretty typical, privileged white male thing where, I went to school, I went to college, and, you come out of there and you get a quote unquote good job, which is, working in an office and, making good money. And that's you're supposed to be happy with that. I was never really happy with that. I did that for about 7 years. I was, actually a transit planner. I still really into public transit. You'll sense a theme here that's going to come up many times in this show. And, I kind of, through stumbling through a series of bad jobs and kind of moved to New York I was in Boston for a long time. I moved to New York for a job that was not what it was promised to be. It didn't work out. I was miserable after 3 months. I said, I got to find something else. And I remember I made an announcement and I told everybody, there were like 8 people in my division, and I told everybody that, this is what I was going to do. And I don't know what I'm going to do now, but, I'm going to take some time to figure it out. And everybody's like, oh my God, you're giving up this pension, all this stuff. And then the very next day it was, oh, I'm so jealous. I wish I could do that. I feel stuck. And I'm like, you asshole, you almost made me not do it. But so I just stumbled through a series of jobs. I did all kinds of jobs. I did retail. I did, a lot of delivery jobs. I drove a pedicab in a number of different cities, which was, maybe a topic for another show, but, very difficult, job. And, and eventually I just decided I also, the other aspect of it is that I get bored in different places. I've been here, I traveled around. I was in Minneapolis and I traveled a bunch of different places, wound up back in Boston for a couple of years doing delivery jobs. And then I took a big leap. Now I'm in Breckenridge, Colorado, just working, trying to do this thing where I work I work for 3 to 6 months, and then I travel for a while, and then I work for 3 to 6 months, and I travel for a while, and I drive buses. And one of the reasons for that is that because aside from being something that I can tolerate and like working with people, I can always get a job wherever I go. There's always some kind of shuttle or somebody else that's hiring. And so now, I've been here. It's a little over 6 months, and I'm bored. So that's kind of how that works. I get bored every 6 months or so. Gotta keep moving.
The fate of the nomad. You end up you want to go to a place, and then you end up kind of burning out on the space. But there's always new places to go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things with I'm going to be getting on my bike after here. I'm going to be going across Utah, and pretty excited about that. So just got to keep moving.
We're definitely going to talk about that. I'm curious, what was the first place that you decided to move to once you were like, okay, I'm done with this job? Where did you go first, and what was the reasoning behind that?
So this is back in, we're talking about 2013 now. I was in,
All the way back in 2013, mind you.
yeah. Well, actually it was in 2012 that I had left my job and, I stayed in New York for a while after that, trying to, New York is a very difficult place to live if you're not making a lot of money. And so, but I wanted a tour. I knew I wanted a bike tour, and I had this idea that I was going to go out and be on the road. And I read a lot of the stuff about, being location independent and having your online businesses and things like that. And everybody's like, oh, you can start a blog and you make $1 million. And I found out pretty quickly the hard way that didn't work. And so, but I wanted to get moving. So I went to Chicago. I had a friend call me up and say, I got an opening at my place in Chicago. Do you know anybody? And I said, I'll go spend a little time there. So I hung out there for a couple months, drove in a pedicab, and then I left. I remember on St. Patrick's Day, I drove the pedicab, miserable day. I worked from like 5 a.m. to 2 a.m., but I made $1,000 and I took off and I rode up from Chicago. I rode up to Milwaukee, across Wisconsin, and then I went up in Minnesota. I spent a little time in Minneapolis, and I looped around the Lake Superior and wound up in Michigan. And I did that on the Brompton in the winter, and that was fun. And then I worked in Minneapolis for a little while and kind of came back to Boston by accident and got a job and did that for a while. And then I felt stuck. I just felt like I was in a rut. And I was doing these series of delivery jobs where I would, work for 6 months and I'd get bored, or my boss would be a jerk or whatever. And so I'd quit, and then I'd be off for a few months and I'd run out of money. And so then I'd get a job and et cetera. And then I needed a change. So I knew, but I knew also that if I got a job driving buses, that I could go to different places and be marketable. And I love public transit, so that's kind of how that happened. And I came here because there's a very good bus system, and it was a good place to get started.
So the bus driving gig came as a result of going through, jumping headfirst into this lifestyle, and then realizing that was sort of the right mix of skill set, interest, etc., that can help support it. Is that a fair way of saying it?
Right. And I needed some way to make money, and I wasn't, even if I could get this online thing to work, if I could do that, it's, there's a lot of work building that up, and I just don't want to be on a computer all day, and I want to separate my travel from my work. So I can tour, I can just focus on that. And then when I'm working, I can work and do all the overtime and then save up.
You mentioned that you went on a tour after your Chicago time. Was that your first bike tour? And if it wasn't, what got you into bike touring?
No, I did a big tour of Southern Ontario in 2010.
Okay.
And I've done some shorter tours too. I like bike touring because it's a good way to see places. And I've always been the kind of person that goes from like place to place. I like seeing the cities and the towns, and I'm less interested in the stuff in between, although this Utah might be an exception because of the scenery. But bike touring and transit are kind of like my two ways to travel, because, I don't like hiking as much because you have to carry all your stuff on your back. Transit, can be complicated and you're on somebody else's schedule, even though it's often a good way to see the country. I never thought about driving. I never had a car, so that was never a thing that I thought about. I have thought about, trying to get an RV or something or a van and try to tour in that. But then I'm committed to something, and whenever I ride my bike, I'm always coming back to the same place, and I don't like doing that. So, bike touring is just a good way to see places, and, it feels like you're doing the work and you're carrying all your stuff, but it's on the bike. It's not on you. And I love camping. I didn't camp until a couple years ago, and I really, I just love being out there.
I've been fascinated in probably the last since the beginning of the year about van living. And I'm sure that you've run into a lot of this in your travels and your research, that people will use that as their means of travel, but also their domicile while they live in places for a little while. Have you ever run into anybody that does the van dwelling life? And what did you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, I've known a few people that do that, and many more that want to do that. It's a different kind of lifestyle. I mean, it's similar to bike touring, and it's, the good thing is that you have space to put your stuff, and so you're not always you're not going through the same machinations. I mean, if it's pouring rain, you got a place to sleep that's dry. You have a kitchen, all that stuff. And so if you often are if you're the type of person who finds yourself staying in hostels and things, then the van or the RV can be the way to go. The downsides, as I see it, I mean, you're burning a ton of fossil fuels, which is not something that I'm really interested in. But also, and you have a motor vehicle, right? So things break, and you're always having to get into that, and you're having to drive it, to sit. One of the things that I don't like about bus driving is, you're just sitting for many hours in a seat, and I like being active. So that's one of the challenges with the RV is that you're having those issues, I guess.
Yeah, and also I know that minimalism is a piece of what kind of attracts you, and there's nothing less minimalist than owning a motor vehicle. It is about the least minimalist thing you could do, especially when you're in a place where when you go to a place, you have to find a rental, you have to find a place to crash, whatever. But once you've burnt through that place, well, you don't have to worry about picking it up and moving it to the next place. You just go yourself, so it makes things a little bit easier, I'd imagine.
Yeah, exactly. And I struggle with that. I'm not, I've been every time I move, I get rid of more and more stuff. And when I came here, I think I had about 8 boxes, and now I'm gonna be trying to do it with like 2 or 3 when I get out of here. And I struggle because I have the 2 bikes. I have the full-size bike and I have the Brompton. And I struggle. And actually now I have a 3rd bike here because I do a lot of mountain biking here. So but I will get rid of that. But I struggle with this too. And it's not, and that's one of the nice things about having a van would be that, I could just put my stuff in there. But then of course, it's like having a house is you just get more stuff.
More stuff and more stuff spread around too. Yeah. It's funny when you say, I've got 3 bikes, I do too, but I have one that actually lives in Oregon because I tour there so often that, bringing a bike, even my Brompton out there, there's stuff. There's hassles involved with all of that. So I actually bought a used bike out there and have it in my brother's garage. So that was one way for me to kind of, it's not minimalist, but it sort of is a way of dealing with traveling and still be able to linking touring into all of this. So it's just interesting to hear everyone's solutions for all of this, especially when you're much more location independent than I am, but I try to have elements of having a foot in Portland as much as possible without actually living there. So.
Yeah, it's good to have that. I mean, and at the end of the day, the lighter you can travel, the better things are going to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to out you now. You're a geographer. How does that inform your bicycle touring? And do you think sort of the sub question is, do you think you tour differently because of that perspective?
I think first of all, I should say, I think a lot of people misunderstand what geography is. A lot of people are like, oh, you can, stuff on a map. And it's like, well, that's a small piece of it. But, and geography is about, at a very high level, it's about our interactions with the environments around us and with each other. And so I like to meet people and see places. And that's, one of the things I'll get sometimes when I'm touring is I'll be, on the way to a particular place, or I'll be making a side trip. I'll be, like when I was going by Detroit, and I was like, oh, I'm going to get to Detroit tomorrow. Oh, you don't need to see that. It's like, well, yeah, I do. Oh, no, there's nothing there. It's like, well, I'm a geographer. I need to see and understand and appreciate all these different places. And how humans have molded that environment, for better or worse, often worse. I mean, you think about the environments that we're trying to see, and, we're riding through this country, and, so much of it has been just ruined. And that's actually one of the things that's motivated me to really get out and hit the road and make this thing work is that, I want to see the world before it gets destroyed. And, it sounds like hyperbole, but actually one of the places I'm going in Utah, might be taken off the list of national monuments next year. So, or soon, it's actually being talked about. So, stuff like that. It's, I know people here who work here in the winter and then they go to Alaska in the summer, and, cause this is seasonal work. And, they talk about how it's changed even in the past few years with climate change. There's places you used to be able to hike and you can't hike anymore, and, things like that. So, trying to get out there and see things. And I think I have that appreciation of how, the world is not, it's not going to be the same, and we're not going to have, understanding how things are changing. I hear family and others still trying to get me to, do this, full-time job thing with 2 weeks of vacation. And it's like, yeah, okay, that sounds great that you're going to have this retirement savings, but, even if you get the savings, even if you do manage to save well, we're not going to have a traditional retirement in 30 years just because of the way that things are going to be changing. We're going to have droughts and floods, and people are going to be living in different places. And it's hard to really predict what's going to happen, but it's going to be a very different world.
I think that's an interesting perspective, and I match that with, you know, when you're on a bicycle and you're traveling by bicycle, and I've talked about this on the show before, you know, we see things at about, 10 miles per hour, roughly, give or take, as opposed to 55, 60, 70 miles per hour. So I think that I feel like I notice things very differently along the routes that I go, and I notice more, and I can notice these types of changes, even these subtle things that are happening in the natural environment and the man-made environment. It's interesting how much I notice. So you add on the perspective of what's happening because of climate change. I think that maybe we as bike tourists may be even more, I don't know, able to notice these things. What do you think? Do you find that to be the case for you?
Yes, and I also think we'll be, because we interact with it more, and we are more, in some ways we're more resilient, and we'll be better off when shit does hit the fan. Like, we'll be better off than people who have never left their house aside from staying in a hotel, because we'll know how to get around and how to camp and how to find food and all that. But in other ways, when you're on a bike, you're very dependent on others and on the environments around you. If you you need water, for example, right? You don't have a pipe coming into the back of your panniers. I mean, that would be nice, right? If you had a movable pipe that was coming in and you could just turn on the faucet whenever you wanted to. But the reality is you have to find water. And then, what if you get to a stream and it's not drinkable? And things like that. Or if you get to a town, sometimes you find like the little grocery store in the town, and you mark it on your map, and you get there and they closed early for the day for a family emergency or something. And now, now where are you going to get your food? And so things like that, you're very dependent and very vulnerable on the road. And I think it's a good feeling to know that you're able to get used to that. I think it's important to get used to that.
Yeah, I think the ability to change plans on the fly is a major piece of being a bike tourist. That is for sure. And handling unexpected things that mess with your plans. and that's, I think, all of that. I think this is a good space to pivot from talking about climate change into vegan lifestyle. I am not vegan, nor would I ever describe myself as even vegetarian, but I have dramatically changed the amount of meat that I eat in recent years for environmental reasons. And there's a whole host of reasons why we can go into that. So you're a vegan, and I always find that the vegans that I talk to, and whether they're fully plant-based or they're just trending in that direction, there's always a good story to tell about how they got to where they are. And I'm curious what yours is.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a story per se, but I mean, when I went through life, just, I would eat meat at every meal, and it was just a thing. And, we never really thought about it. I never really had any kind of interactions with animals. Some people come through it and they say, and they have dogs, and they say they come to it and they realize that, okay, well, my dog is not really any different than a pig or a cow. And, I got to stop that. And I didn't have that kind of emotional thing. But I did research it at one point and just basically find out that, what humans are doing to animals just because we have the power is just really horrible. I mean, the fact that, I don't know how much you want to go into it, but I mean, if you talk about how, cows have to be repeatedly impregnated so that they can produce milk so that we can take it and we take their babies away and then impregnate them again. And it's just like standard practice. And so you think about stuff like that, and it's just like, okay, how can I call myself a good person and do that? And so it kind of came to me. I was just asking people questions, and I met a couple of vegans for the first time in my life, like, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. And I was just asking some questions, and they weren't really giving me satisfactory answers. They were just being like, well, I do what I do. I don't really want to talk about it. And, now I get that because, a lot of people can be a pain about it. But, it's, which is funny because it's like the vegans are the ones that are always being told that we're preaching and, pushing our lifestyle and everybody else. But it's, in my experience, it's often the other way around. But no, I did a lot of research on the internet and basically found that it's just really awful. We don't need it. And, it's the more that we study it, the more we find that it's actually really unhealthy to eat significant amounts of animal products. And at the end of the day, it's the way I look at it is like, the animals aren't there for us. Just as, black people aren't there for white people and women aren't there for men. And, we're all we all, obviously we're not the same. We don't have quite the same needs and desires, but there are needs and desires that every animal, including humans, has. And I think we should just respect that. It's just crazy when you think about that we breed billions of animals specifically so that we can then kill them and eat them, and which we don't need to do. And so it's crazy. And it's just something I've been doing for a long time now. I think it's almost 12 years now. And so I'm just used to it. I don't really think about it too often. But it is weird when I get put in situations where it's kind of put in my face, and I'm like, oh wow, people are still doing this.
It's funny you mentioned that part about evangelicizing, to pick a word. Yeah. I think is that it does feel like, I'm involved in obviously the yoga industry. My girlfriend is an aspiring vegan, has been veg forever, and I go to a lot of events that she's very big into animal welfare and whatnot. So I'm going to a lot of these events and seeing a lot of this evangelization, and I see sort of the more activist side of the vegan lifestyle. And so it's just interesting to see there are a lot of people out there that aren't sort of really actively trying to make change out there, that they're just sort of like observing it, seeing it, and making the change in themselves, and that's good enough for them. So it's a good reminder that that's there. So when I'm out on the road or the trails or whatever, I find it's really not hard to eat totally plant-based. Any place that I've ever been, but there are definitely parts of the country and presumably parts of the world where the trade-off tends to mean having to eat a lot of processed stuff or even sugary foods that I would like to avoid in order to kind of hit the amount of calories that I need, what's available, things like that. Kind of your food desert setup where maybe your purchasing choice is kind of a corner gas station in the middle of nowhere. What's your experience like for travel in places like that, and how do you deal with these kind of food deserts when you're on tour?
Yeah, I have trouble with healthy snacks. When I'm out there, just because they're not really available. You don't really have like co-ops and natural food stores and stuff like that. And like I said, fruit is tough. But I do my best to go to supermarkets. If I find a big supermarket, I will, stock up. And even, some of these, often you're dealing with like small convenience stores, gas station convenience stores. That's a lot of what I was dealing with when I was in Maine, actually. And, I would go in there and buy a couple cans of beans and cans of vegetables, and, I would eat that, and, make it work. It's the best I can do in a situation like that. Sometimes I might have fruit, but it usually isn't in great shape and isn't usually worth eating. But sometimes you get, you got to take advantage of when you can find free food as well. Sometimes people will give you leftover things, and if you're in bigger cities, you can often find leftover stuff. But it's difficult, and a lot of times, one of the challenges that I had in my tour last year, and I think I'm going to have again, is that so much disposable stuff. I really don't like buying like a single-use can of kidney beans. So I buy a can of kidney beans, I buy a can of green beans, and maybe a can of corn or something, and there's your meal. And it costs you, maybe $5, but you're creating a lot of disposable waste, and it's really not the tastiest thing in the world. It's probably not the healthiest thing in the world. It's got a lot of salt, and it's loaded with it's probably preservatives and everything. But sometimes you do the best you can, and that's how that goes. Try to bring on Cliff Bars and Lara Bars and things, but if you've ever been on a tour where you have relied on Cliff Bars, you can only eat so many of those before you just swear you'll never eat one again.
Yeah, usually around day 2 or 3.
Yes.
I was helping a guy with a flat on a tour I was on this weekend, and he only had one tire lever, so I helped him out, give him my tire levers to help him get his tire off. And he's like, "Oh man, what can I do to help you? I got a bunch of extra Cliff Bars." I'm like, "Nope, thank you, no more Cliff Bars for me." Speaking of my weekend tour, I found my ability to stick with my eating plan, and it wasn't veg or vegan, but you go in with an eating plan. I find it's always battered by my sudden intense caloric needs, my weird cravings that develop, and then just availability, which we sort of got into on the last question. What's your general plan when you get on tour? It sounds like hitting grocery stores is kind of a thing, but do you plan to carry a lot of food with you, or do you just sort of let it ride and say, I'm going to find something and that's just how it's going to be?
Well, my next tour, I'm going to be carrying a lot more food because I'm going to have 70, 100-mile distances between places between gas station convenience stores, let's say. But so I'll carry more. But typically, I like to have a good reserve of oatmeal that I can cook. I usually bring the quick oats, and then I just boil water and put water in it, and that works for me. I'll bring the bars and stuff. But I don't really, and I'll try to get stuff from supermarkets, but I don't really like to really cook on tour. I'm not one of those people that's like buying a whole bunch of vegetables and, making a stir fry and all that. It's just a little too difficult on the tour, and in my experience. When I get into a town with a, little Chinese takeout place or a Indian buffet, things like that are my friends. You take what you can. You can find food, if you're gonna pay for somebody else to cook you food, you can find stuff pretty much anywhere. And so that's often an option too. But I try to stick on the grains. So I have oatmeal. I use, I eat grits too, like cornmeal is good for touring. But I don't do pasta. I know a lot of people love pasta. I don't do pasta. It's just it requires way too much water, and it's it's just heavy, and it's not, there's not much nutritional value in that.
Yeah, totally. One of the things that I'm doing in my new eating regimen is to avoid real simple carbohydrates like that, because just the research I've done is, pasta, I may as well be eating a candy bar when all is said and done.
Yeah.
Now, is it as bad as having sugar? Just straight sugar? It's kind of close. And that's just fascinating because it's just so counter to all of the nutritional advice we've had in athletic endeavors forever, that you carb up before, and carbs are important, but at the same time, what we're putting in our bodies, it's just kind of interesting that certain foods don't behave as well in certain bodies, and for me, that's certainly been the case.
Yeah.
One of the big benefits I see with going plant-based in whole or in part for a tour is cost savings, because you, at least if you're dining out a lot, or you're hitting roadside stands, or cooking your own food, that you can often go a lot cheaper, get your caloric needs met, and have a really nice dinner, breakfast, etc. A lot cheaper going plant-based. Has that been your experience? And can you chat a bit about that?
Well, I think that's true in general. Like I said, I've been vegan now for, talking about probably, at least 10 years. So it's not something that I really have recent experience with, like to say, like, what's the difference between eating plant-based and not. I can't really know that. What I do know is that my food budget can go anywhere from $15 to $50 a day, depending on the amount I spend on food. I don't ever budget that much, but the amount I spend on food is anywhere from 15 to 50 in a day. And that just depends on what I'm eating. I mean, usually the lower end, usually 15 to 30 is what I'm eating. And that will often include like one, a $10 meal that I might eat out, once every couple of days or something. But I guess, I don't know. It just depends where you're buying your food and what exactly it is that you're eating. I mean, if you eat, the vegans get this all the time. People say, "Oh, it's expensive to be a vegan," and that's true if you buy like fake cheeses and tofu and all this other stuff. But if you eat like rice and beans and vegetables, it's pretty cheap. And so I try to do my best to keep the budget down. Oatmeal is really cheap. I try to buy even when I have to buy stuff in a supermarket that's not. It's like some random convenience store. Like I will buy cans of beans, which are pretty cheap.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I just bought a 4-pack of black beans for a lot of the eating we do in our home. And, it was $2.40, I think, for 4 cans. So you're talking, 60 cents a can. And that's a lot of fiber. That's a lot of protein. There's a lot of good stuff in a can of black beans. And I'm I don't know if I could eat a whole can when sitting even myself, even on tour. But I think that you can really find, depending on what your needs are and what you're interested in, you can certainly do that. I mean, you were talking about how, you would get a can of beans and a can of vegetables or something like that. You can walk out of a gas station on tour and do it for, $3-5, something like that.
Yeah. And if I have an actual decent supermarket, I'll get bananas, and I'll get, oranges, and, I'll get actual fruit and things that are real, sustenance, but, or that are, that are of interest to me, that I really want to eat more than canned beans, but nothing wrong with canned beans. You
were talking about maybe doing the West Coast at some point, or maybe even this year. I think you had mentioned it in an email, and I just keep thinking of the towns in Oregon as I go through in Northern California, and knowing, oh, there's a Fred Meyer in this one. Oh, there's a Safeway in this next one. Yep. And just knowing, life is going to be good. I'm going to eat very well when I get there, and I'm going to eat very well the next night or two, as a result of that. And so yeah,
speaking of budget busters, nothing better than, the farm stand. Oh my God.
Oh, absolutely.
Corn and the berries. Oh my God.
Well, and I would even go a step further. Again, on the Pacific Coast Tour, in a section in Northern California near where the redwoods are, especially along the Avenue of the Giants, there are blackberry bushes all along that route. And if you're hitting it at the right time, in like that July, August timeframe, there is nothing better than wild berries. If that is something that you can have and be at and feel okay that they haven't been sprayed by some toxic roadside chemical by the Department of Transportation of whatever state you're in. That's the kind of stuff that you can really do. So yeah, I think from a cost saving standpoint, removing or not thinking about animal based products, you can eat just as good and fill up and get your calories met and all of that other stuff. And it can be a really good way to frame your thinking on tour. Even if you are still hitting the beef jerky and you're still a meat eater, you can think about the cost savings that you can get by replacing your calories in other ways. And it's just a good thought process, a mental thought process, even if you are an omnivore. That's what I've always thought.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit, haha, bike joke, and chat about your adventures touring on a Brompton, because I think obviously I've done it. I've talked about it on the show. What's your favorite part about touring on what I like to call the little clown bike?
Yeah, I love using bikes in transit, and I think this is a really good way to do it. I do use transit a lot, and even when I have my regular bike, I'm going to be having my regular bike in this tour, and I had my regular bike in Maine and Vermont. No offense to Brompton owners, it's a regular bike too. But I'd like to be able to get on transit when, if there's a bad road, or if I decide that I want to make up a little bit of time, or I just, it's just an easier way to see the country. I mean, if you have a 200-mile stretch, of the road with like absolutely nothing around and just surrounded by trees and farmland, you can see it just as well on a bus as you can see it on the bike. And I like being able to do that. I have taken my bike, I've taken both bikes on all kinds of transit, but I like that, to be able to bring it anywhere. Sometimes you have to be very discreet about it. They don't always, not everybody wants you to bring it everywhere. But you can, and you don't have to lock it up anywhere. At least I'm afraid to lock a thing up anywhere. It's way too expensive. And I don't like that it's very limited space, but in a sense it's good because it gets me to really pare down and really get stick to the basics. I got that front bag, it's got my food. And then on the back, I rigged my hiking backpack with my tent, sleeping bag, and my sleeping pad, and maybe a couple of extra things. But now I just got a smaller tent, which I'm super excited about. So yeah, that's how I go, and it keeps it down. It's a showpiece, which is good and bad, right? You
get a lot of attention, don't you?
Yeah, which is good and bad. Sometimes you want to talk to people on the tour, and other times you're just like, you want to be in your zone, and you're like, oh, how many times I have to tell you, is that a bicycle? Yeah.
How much does it weigh? Right. Where are you going?
And my least favorite, especially in the city, how much does that cost? And I always say something like, oh, it's my roommate's or whatever. I don't know, I want to tell people like, yeah, this is a $1,500 thing that I'm carrying on the subway. I don't ever like to do that. I have a dynamo on mine. I got a bone to pick with you on dynamos. You're not a fan of dynamo hubs?
Oh, hey, fire away, man. I'm open to criticism.
No, I'm a big fan of dynamo hubs. It's an expensive investment, but they're really, really useful to have, and very reliable. And and I love having I just got a device that will charge USB devices when you're not using the headlight. So that's pretty cool. So, even it's nice to be able to take it anywhere. And one of the things that I've become very adept at taking it places. I'm very good at folding it. I can fold it in like 10 seconds, and I have a cover for it. So I will, if I'm taking a transit service that I'm not familiar with, I'm not sure if they're going to be super bike friendly, because a lot of them try to just treat it as a regular bike, which means that they want it in a box and you have to pay $20 and it's a whole big mess. Sometimes I'll just I'll pull up a block away, I'll put the cover over, and then I'll roll it up. It just looks like a weird suitcase. Sometimes you have the challenge where they have baggage limits. I have the reason I rig the backpack to the back of the bike is so that when I fold it, I take it off. I take the backpack off. I put the backpack on my back, and I have the folded Brompton in one hand, and I have the front bag in my other hand. So I can get through bus stations and other places, walking, which is very nice. That said, it's heavy. It's also an extra bag. You try to take Greyhound, they let you bring one bag in the bus and one bag underneath, and that sometimes can be a challenge. So sometimes there's a little bit of creative maneuvering to try to get the two bags underneath without paying an extra $20.
I'm curious, what do you take in the bus with you, and what do you put underneath?
The front bag, because that's where I keep my food.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep. Yeah, because there's a part of me that would say if I haven't been on a Greyhound bus in ages, but a lot of the sort of inner city buses that I've been on, I would love to take the Brompton on with me there rather than have it be away from me. But there's just no way that it could physically fit in any of the compartments that are available on the bus.
Too much of a pain in the ass, and when they stop at some rest area, and it's just more to worry about that. You don't want to have to worry about. When I'm on Amtrak, I will often put it in the overhead. If I'm on the single level cars, it fits plenty of space in the overhead rack, which you're not supposed to do according to their rules. But
of course,
I'll put it above me, a little bit ahead of me, so that this way, like if I see somebody's going to mess with it, I'll see it. But it's not an easy thing to just pick up and take down. So it's like I would notice.
Well, it sounds like you have experience with Amtrak, so as well as I do that their rules are sort of depends on who's enforcing them that day.
That's true, yeah. And I always cover it if I don't know. I always cover it because it's just less potential for issues. And you put it in the rack in such a way that the open end of the cover is on the inside, so that then anybody walking by doesn't notice that there's the bike there. I haven't had issues with Amtrak even before I started just always covering it. They're especially in the Northeast. When I was going to the Northeast, like they're used to it. This is the thing that people have folding bikes, especially in New York. There's a lot of them. This is a thing that people do. It's really more when you go out to when you're out in the Midwest and the Plains where this is not a common thing, where people don't really have these and they've never seen them before. And so they just want to treat it as a regular bike. They don't understand there's a distinction to be made. It's officially endorsed distinction.
Oh, yeah. I've had the exact same experience when I last spring when I did the California tour on the Brompton. There were a lot of questions going through the airport, and I've gotten used to that. It's the same thing that you were describing on the subway kind of a thing. How much does that cost? Oh, is that a bike? What is that? And stealth mode and getting it by the right people. But it was really interesting once I was in, what did that have been? Half Moon Bay, which is right on the coast there, south of San Francisco and continuing on south. Just the people would just sit there and their eyes would widen as I would ride by on this, crazy little 16-inch wheeled bike with a big backpack on the back and then my orange Ortlieb pannier on front on this big orange bike. I mean, I am the most visible thing for like a mile and a half around. But yeah, it is so fascinating to get those double takes. But I'm curious, my experience with other tourists, I'm curious what your experience with other tourists was.
I don't know. I think mostly it's been, that's pretty cool. Most people think, you got to admit the thing is, it does look pretty hilarious when you see somebody riding it. And so,
totally.
You can understand why people think it's just, it requires a lot more effort and, and it really doesn't. I guess it requires some more effort and I found that you can only coast when you're coasting down a big hill. There's kind of a maximum about 22 miles an hour. It won't go more than that. I found, but, it's just, you just can't carry as much stuff, but it's great for when you're touring because you never know when you're going to want to get on transit. I mean, you might plan it that way, but you might also have a situation where, you just decide that just spur of the moment, decide that you want to take a bus somewhere, and it gives you that, or if you need to hitchhike or whatever, it gives you that option. I've hitchhiked a couple times with it, and in Colorado, and you can hitchhike with a full size bike, but it's much harder, and so it just gives you a lot of flexibility. Most people seem to think it's cool. A lot of people want to ride it and want to just see what it's like, and they get on it and they're like, oh wow, this is like kind of the same experience I had when I first tested it out in New York, and I was like, oh wow, this kind of rides like a regular bike.
Yeah, totally. And I've owned another bike before, a folding bike before, a Dayhan, and it rides substantially differently. And it's different size wheels and everything. The Dayhan was great. Mm-hmm. In fact, a listener of the show ended up purchasing off me. Hey, Matt, hope it's going well in Jersey. But it really is interesting, and it's got a stability to it that I was really surprised at. It really does ride like a full size. It rides as stable as a full size bike, but rides differently, as you well know.
Yeah.
So, add up all of the different things that you've got going on. You drive buses, you're a transit enthusiast, you've got a Brompton, you're a total natural to talk about fast forwards, mm-hmm. which has been something I've been talking about on the show forever. How do you use them? And do you have a favorite one that you've ever done, whether it was kind of one you've done on a repeated basis or one that you've done as a one shot in a tour?
I don't know that I have a favorite. I don't, typically go to different places. But I used to, when I was in Boston, I would use the regional rail a lot to go to other cities. But, and I like, take it on the bus to go, when I would go between Boston and New York. I mean, it's 200 miles. Yeah, you could ride it, but it's not a fun ride that you'd really want to do. So, stuff like that. But, I like when I plan a route and I find that there's going to be, like when I was in Vermont, a very long sec, like Route 4, it was just miles and miles of 2-lane road with heavy traffic, no shoulder, and not much around. And it's like, why would I want to bike that? I would just take my bike on the bus. And there I had my full size bike. So I had a little bit of there were some challenges with the full size bike. And sometimes, you have to, most of the bus companies will let you throw it underneath. If they have a big coach bus, like a Greyhound type bus, they'll let you throw it underneath, as long as it doesn't, get any baggage dirty, or, some of them say it has to go in a separate bin. But sometimes it's a challenge. Sometimes they want you to, box it, or I've had a few buses that are like small buses, almost like vans, and you just kind of get them to let you throw it in the back. But then of course it's like, okay, well, if the bus is full, then, and you have to agree that if the bus is full, you'll get off, so you run into stuff like that. The Brompton, they don't even know it's a bike. So they just, if you do it well, they don't know it's a bike. So it's just a suitcase. You can't kick somebody off for having a big suitcase. As long as they keep it out of the aisle, then, it's not an issue. But I did have some challenges, and I do like, I like when there's a bike rack on the front. It's nice and easy. Or, the coach bus is pretty good. Just throw it underneath. But I like Amtrak. I like taking the train. Amtrak is getting more and more bike friendly. You still can't take your bike everywhere, because if they don't have a checked baggage service at a particular station, then you can't. Then you usually can't take your bike still, unless you have a folding bike. So,
and allegedly that's going to be changing slowly over the course of the next year, because they're adding the new baggage cars with the bike racks onto all of the long haul trains. But as with everything with Amtrak, you gotta kind of wait to see what happens, yeah. Right? I was on the train this weekend going out to the end of the trail that I was going to be riding on, the C&O, and I was surprised when I rolled up and got onto the baggage car that they told me to go in. I'm like, there's no bike racks here. It was the old style baggage car. So the bike sort of just went in there. There wasn't a bike rack for it. And what was crazy is for years they've said, well, we can't put bikes in the old style thing, and you've got to be boxed. And now right. I'm doing it right now. So Amtrak loves to Amtrak. Let's just put it that way. And I do love it.
Yeah, that's just great when you meet people who are just like reasonable people who are just like, oh yeah, okay, it's not gonna, it's fine. There's room for it. It's not gonna affect anything. Or they, people who are into bikes, like here in Colorado, there's not a ton of people who bike for transportation and commute, but pretty much everybody bikes as a method of recreation. So, everybody loves bikes, and there it's like you see a bike, it's like, oh, okay, well we'll make it work, And I don't know how I could forget ferries. When I plan my route, I get super excited when I can go on a ferry. When I did a loop of Lake Champlain with 3 ferries, in near Burlington, Vermont, and that was super amazing. I love riding ferries. It's just you're out there on the water. Bringing your bike is usually super easy. Sometimes they want to charge you, so it's extra. Sometimes it's a couple dollars, and I've had a few situations where it's like, oh, they want $10 for the bike. Well, I guess it's way easier if I could just roll the bike on and leave it there. But if I fold it up, then I can save them $10. So I've had things like that. But I love taking ferries. I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, I have the same experience, and I'm terrible on the water. So if it's an extended ferry ride, like I did from Seattle to Victoria, BC, I'm popping the Dramamine and just praying for things to be over. But the short ones, oh, those are great. Those are fun.
I grew up on the Staten Island Ferry in New York. You talk about slow moving, big harbor, ferry 5 miles an hour, and it's super stable because the thing is huge. And then you go out and you some of these little boats that carry 10 people. It's like, oh my God, you feel like you're going to die.
I know it. Jeremy, what's next for you? You talked about doing a trip in Utah. What's sort of the next downtime or uptime, or however we're characterizing your touring time? What's next?
I call this uptime. I call it my travel season, my work season. I'm actually going to be touring southern Utah with a friend. My original plan was to ride out of here on a Brompton and head west, but I'm going to be out of here in a couple of weeks. It's going to be a little cold. I'm in the mountains, about 10,000 feet up. And so we're going to do a fast forward to Utah, and we're going to ride across and hit all 5 national parks and do some hiking and maybe some mountain biking within the parks, if we can get our hands on mountain bikes. And then I'm actually going to take the backpack I'm going to strap the backpack on the rack on my regular bike so that I can have that for hiking. And then we're going to finish in the Grand Canyon. And when I get there, I think going to go west and try to get to LA, maybe get see a couple friends, maybe get a little bit of downtime for a week or two, and then see what's next. I'm hoping that I can ride the West Coast finally. I've been dreaming of it for years. I'm hoping that I can finally do the West Coast, thinking I'm going to take the train up to Vancouver, do a little loop around Vancouver Island, and then come down along the coast as far as I can get without needing to work again. And I'll work again, and then I'll tour again.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And I think a lot of folks who listen to the show, me included, are a bit jealous of that lifestyle. And that's sort of what this show's been about, is to try to give people ideas on how to maybe make some simple changes to their lives, or big changes to their lives like you did, to be able to tour more. And so you're a real inspiration. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and I should say it's not always amazing. I mean, people, I don't want to sugarcoat things, because a lot of times that's what people do. People going to travel, they talk about how amazing it is, and you have to be diligent about saving up money and not spending. And one of the things about, one of the reasons I do the bus driving is so that I can work in different places. But you also, you have to be careful to plan it out, and you don't want to just run. Last time I pretty much ran down to zero, and you don't want to do that, because you come to a new place and you need a security deposit, and you need to, you don't get paid for a little while. But if you can't find a job right away, so you got to be careful with all that. But if you're decent at, reasonably responsible, and then you can probably make it work.
That sounds pretty interesting. And it also sounds like that's fodder for your website to share some tips if somebody wanted to do something like that. So why don't you share your contact information and website so people can read more and listen more, because you've got some cool podcasts as well.
Sure. So I've been writing for many years on transit, and I got a chronicles of my recordings from my Vermont and Maine tour at criticaltransit.com. And I also have a website called the vegantravelpodcast.com. And you can, if you find out about traveling as a vegan and other things along the road. I think the last episode was about hitchhiking, I believe. So
yeah, I saw that, and I haven't had a chance to listen to any of the vegan ones, because I just discovered that you podcast on that. So now I'm excited to listen to those. So that's a really awesome resource. So I'll check that out, Jeremy's site, and that's criticaltransit.com, and I'll have that in the show notes as well. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time and chatting with us on Pedalshift.
Thank you. It's been a blast.
Definitely check out Jeremy's stuff over at criticaltransit.com. He's got a ton of really cool stuff, some good podcasts, some really good, interesting writing. I mean, as you can tell just by the interview itself, Jeremy's got a really cool lifestyle that I think a lot of people that listen to this show might be, I don't know, a little bit jealous of. I know I am to a certain extent, that's for darn sure. I also wanted to throw out a few things, as I mentioned in the interview, some further reading on moving towards plant-based eating, if that's kind of what you're interested in. It's a really personal choice, and the information load can be a bit overwhelming. And as a result, here's just a curated list of 3 things. 2 books that I would recommend that you dive into: Diet for a Small Planet and The Omnivore's Dilemma. This is especially true if you're not necessarily going to be going into the vegan space, but you're looking at, okay, what are the elements of eating meat and what does it mean in the larger scope of things? So check those 2 books out. The other one, which I thought was actually kind of interesting because it's a good shades of gray exploration of the issue, and it's an article in CNN, Is a Vegetarian Diet Really More Environmentally Friendly Than Eating Meat? Some shades of gray there for those of you who think that it's just like it's all yes, absolutely one way, or no, absolutely another. Go check that out. Some good information there. There are a lot of different things that came out of this interview for me, just learning more about kind of shaping your lifestyle around the bike. I think that that's really, really cool and important. And of course, always love talking about the Brompton. If you want to hear more about touring on a Brompton, of course, I've done it. If you weren't around last year, I did an entire tour journal around it. That's Pedalshift Tour Journals, Volume 5, California Coast. And it asks and answers the question, can a loaded Brompton handle the hills of Big Sur? And it's an hour and 46 minutes of touring stories. It's just $10 and it helps support the show. So go check that out. I've got a link in the show notes for that. Plus there's a little preview that you can play as well. Real brief connections on this episode of the Pedalshift Project. I've got another 5-star review to report by Baba Lives, and it is Returning Cyclist is the title of it. It says, great podcast. I'm headed to ride a long weekend on the Katy Trail in Missouri in 2 weeks. Keep up the good work. And that was back in early April, so hopefully Baba Lives got a chance to listen to last episode talking all about the Katy Trail. Again, it's definitely something that's out there. Got a few nibbles from friends of the show who are interested in doing this potentially. So if I do end up doing the Katy Trail this year, I think maybe I'll make sure people know about it and maybe we can all cross paths. We'll see. No promises. It's a weird year. I don't know how to describe it other than it being a weird year, just in terms of tour planning for myself. But I've got some ideas. We'll see how it goes. Next week, speaking of weird, keep Portland weird. I'm going back to the land of sunshine and bunnies. I'll be in the Northwest for a family member's wedding. My cousin is getting hitched. So I will, of course, be going back to Portland, Oregon. And this time, I'm not just having a beer with the lads from the Sprocket podcast. I will actually be having beers with them while we're in front of microphones. And we know what that means. It's a Pedalshift Sprocket podcast crossover. There will be beer. There shall be some good stuff to talk about. And that will be recording early next week as this show is being recorded. And we'll have it out on Thursday, 7 a.m. Eastern Time, just like normal, to wrap up the month of April. A lot of good stuff this month. We'll wrap up the show, as always, as a big thank you to all of the monthly supporters of the show and annual supporters and one-shot supporters from the Pedalshift Society. If you like what you hear, you can help me keep the show listener-supported while expanding the offerings. $5, $2, $1 a month. It all helps with the costs of the podcast and the website, and you can do it a bit and cancel anytime. Go to pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Ethan Georgie, Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lane, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Josiah Matthews, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Michael Risica, Seth Krieger, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Noah Schroer, Harry Telgadas, John Sikorsky, Richard Killian, Chris Barron, Scott Taylor, Brian Wren, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Paul Mulvey, Stuart Buchan, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, and Nathan Poulton, and thank you all to all anonymous and past contributors for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net. Lots of great content. You can hear the Pedalshift Project through iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his debut album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Habitat, wherever cool music is available.